Hello, this video will cover Chapter 6 material. So we talked in Chapter 2 about ions and losing electrons and gaining electrons. This chapter is going to really focus on what's going on and how atoms are losing electrons. So just a little review about some of the guys in the history of Chapter 2. We talked about Dalton's atomic model. Remember, his theory was atoms are the smallest unit, so they don't get broken up anymore. We know that's false at this point. We know that there's protons, neutrons, and electrons based on various people's theories. The first guy that we talked about, or one of the guys we talked about, was Thomson, and he came up with the plum pudding model after determining there was a positive atom and electrons. And so his model kind of looks like a pie where there's positive locations and electrons are just spread out wherever, kind of like in a cloud. This was before we determined there was neutrons around. And if you remember from Chapter 2, Rutherford, the gold foil experiment determined there was protons and neutrons in the nucleus. And so his model really determined a little bit more about correct locations of the atomic model. So he had the nucleus correct. He knew that there was protons and neutrons inside. And he determined that electrons revolve around the nucleus, but kind of still more in a cloud kind of model. We really get the most common visualization we have that is fairly correct is the Bohr model. So the Bohr model had the protons and neutrons in the nucleus, in the center. But instead of having electrons going any which place, Bohr determined that electrons are in sort of a fixed position in what we call discrete levels. Unfortunately, his model is only really good for hydrogen, where we only have one electron. But a lot of the models that we do see today are based on the Bohr model. Bohr really started this idea of quantized energy levels and is one of the first and founding fathers, whether he knew it or not, of quantum mechanics. Clicker question, which atomic model is most accurate? Just like I just said, it would be the Bohr model D. So to understand quantum mechanics and how weird it is, we have to understand how classical mechanics can't be applied. And so we know a lot, and you guys have probably heard, especially if you watch Big Bang Theory, about quantum mechanics and Schrödinger and things like that, and Heisenberg uncertainty. But given the ideas and the concepts at the time, these ideas were crazy. So this was in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and we really were still in the science mode, really just thinking about classical mechanics, so Newton's laws and things like that. And so classical mechanics and physics didn't really understand and not really explain what's going on with an atom, because we have a center that's positive and then electrons going about. So if you think about magnets, if you have a north pole and south pole, those attract each other, and so you know that positive and negative attracts. So why don't atoms collapse on itself? So this gave us the collapsing atom paradox that classical physics cannot describe. And then another part of physics that classical mechanics and physics cannot predict was how you can put heat and energy into a system. So as you heat things to higher and higher temperature, they should emit more and more light at higher and higher energy. Conservation of energy and things like that. Unfortunately, this didn't really had no proof of this. And so this is what we call the ultraviolet catastrophe, where classical physics can explain what's going on with the heat and the energy and where that's going into. And then later in experimental physicists careers, they found that particles like electrons, so tiny particles like electrons, are passing through very small openings acting like waves. So they have interference, but at some aspects they still act like particles. So are electrons particles or waves? Now we know a little bit more. We know that energy can be transferred between things. And we talked about energy in the sense of work and heat, but we can also transfer energy as light or electromagnetic radiation. And we can think about radiation being carried through space by waves. So we know that particles act like waves. And so in a description, I should say, of a wave, we have the wavelength, which is literally the distance of the wave. We describe it as either the distance between two peaks or two troughs, like here and here. Wavelength is represented by this Greek letter lambda. And we can think about radiation and waves to help us understand the structure of atoms. Atoms have wave-like characteristics, so they produce interference, they behave, and they diffract. So you can think of waves, you can think of like the ocean coming through and tidal waves, waving goodbye. Some of the common denominators between these definitions is there's an up and a down, right? So you go up and down as the doggy paw is waving at you, and there's an oscillation. And there is length between the how fast you're going, like how fast you're waving versus the length of your wavelength, I should say. And you can think about at a given distance, so let's say from here to here, how many peaks can you get through? So the more peaks you can get through, that means the wavelengths has to be really short. If you go from same distance but have longer wavelengths, you can't fit as many in. So we say that wavelengths are too big, and so you don't get as many peaks in. So we call that an inverse relationship between the wavelength and how often the wavelength occurs in a given period. And we call that the frequency. So lambda, the wavelength, is a distance. Its unit is, in SI units, is meters. We don't usually use meters as a common description of wavelengths because usually they're very, very small distance. We usually use nanometers. We also talk about amplitude, or how strong the wave is. So you think of like little tiny tidal waves versus big waves, and that's the amplitude. And the nodes are where there's zero amplitude. And we're not going to really talk about nodes in this course. If you go on to quantum mechanics and PChem 2, you get to learn a little bit more about that. When we talk about electromagnetic, we break down that word. Electro, like electrons. Magnet means there should be a magnetic field. And so we have an electric field and a magnetic field that's perpendicular. And again, we're not going to go too much in depth about that. Just know that we have fields going on, and we have, most importantly, a wavelength. So that is a distance. The distance between two peaks, okay, will vary based on the color you have. So you can see that as we go through, red has a longer distance, and purple has a shorter distance. You can see that we have a lot more peaks in purple than we do in red. So longer wavelength, shorter wavelength. So purple has a much shorter wavelength than the red. When we talk about and add time, like I said, about the oscillation of waves, then we have a new definition to go through, and that is called frequency. And frequency is a number of waves passing at a given point per unit of time. Our unit of time is our SI unit of seconds. We represent frequency by the Greek letter nu, that is spelled N-U but pronounced like new, like new shoes. And you can't really tell, but this, the way I describe the Greek letter, it's like a V blowing in the wind. So there is some sort of slant to this nu. Its unit, because it's per time, is going to be what we call an inverse second. So it's 1 over second. You can also see it raised, second raised to a -1. These two are just representing the same unit. It also has a special name. This unit is given the name hertz. So if you think about radio or frequencies, you probably heard the name hertz, and that's just 1 over seconds. So like I mentioned before, you can think about frequency of waves is inversely proportional to the wavelength. So the longer the wavelength, the less peaks you can get in. So the lower the frequency. So we say that frequency is inversely proportional to wavelength. So as frequency goes up, the wavelength must decrease. The given equation for that, to make it go from a proportions to an actual equation, we have a constant. And the definition is frequency is equal to speed of light over the wavelength. So here's one of my favorite jokes. So if anyone ever asks you, hey, what's new? You reply, c over lambda. Because speed of light is represented by c. Wavelength is represented by lambda. Okay. Speed of light, this is a number you do have to know. It will not be given on exam 2. The speed of light is 3.00 times 10 to the 8th meters per second. Notice this unit, okay, meters per second. That means when you're dealing with wavelengths, you have to convert to meters to make sure all the units cancel out. In the next video, we're going to go over an example of this calculation, but I'll show it to you in a moment. Here is just a nice page to remind you of the inverse relationship. Longer wavelengths, shorter frequency. So again, you can't fit as many waves into a location. So I'll set this problem up, and then the answer will be on the second video. So for my edible laser project, which I have a collaboration with physics, I use a 450 nanometer laser pointer. What is the frequency of my laser? So think about the process that we use for word problems. First, what are all the important information that's given? What does the question want? So what are you aiming for? And then third, how do we get there? What equations do we want or have to use? Is it just simple arithmetic? And is there any conversions that you have to do? So before you go through to the next video, work this out and see if you can get the same answer as I do.